Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Outside Insider podcast here on Philly Sports Network with myself, Liam Jenkins. You know the score by now. All things Eagles related. The last 7 days, bundled up and put inside a draft envelope. You're the number one pick. That's whose name is on the piece of paper. Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. If it's your first time listening, you're wondering why there's a British kid talking about the Eagles, hopefully I can win you over. This has been a bit more of a sporadic podcast as of late. I haven't been anywhere near as regular, I would say, with this podcast as I have been to YouTube content and articles, and that's kind of the reason why. Like, podcasts on a Friday are often my wind down time. The problem is that by that point, I've covered absolutely everything in articles and videos, and our two other flagship podcasts for the Eagles, Flipping the Birds with Chris and Brian, and obviously Birds in Focus with Nick Farrier, both do amazing jobs of bringing variety and bringing on guests. So I want to keep this sort of separate. Like, when action picks up, we get towards OTAs and training camp, obviously will be weekly. But especially in the off-season, I don't just want to give you guys nothing. Like, if I'm going to give you an hour-long podcast, there better be something in it. And this is the first time in a while I think I can. Now, after the NFL draft has happened, the Eagles come away with a plethora of new players. There's a lot to talk about. Some were controversial, some were less controversial. But I felt that instead of just looking at each pick and saying, oh, great pick, bad pick, and there are some podcasts and networks out there being very negative still about this draft, and from what I understand, again, being in England, I don't best know, but sport talk radio at the minute is a little bit of a mess, and that's fun in a way. So what I wanted to do was take a slightly different approach to this, because I've spent a week looking at film, kind of writing articles. I mean, the big project, so to speak, that I wrote today was on Jalen Hurts, and this move was a long time coming, and this kind of intertwines with the bigger aspects of this podcast. So we'll start at the top, we will work our way down, but the Jalen Hurts pick is integral to this, and I can't believe I'm saying this. I understand it, and it's not for the reasons you think, and it's not that it's a threat to Carson, it's not that he's going to come on as a running back, it's not that he's going to be flipped in a few years. There is a reason Jalen Hurts was picked at quarterback, I believe, and we're going to get into that because it fits this wider picture. And it all starts with two things, really, in the way that I feel like this draft for the Eagles was so important. It was the most important of Doug Peterson's career, of Howie Roseman's career. And I think that was exemplified by the fact that in the offseason, they had a total coaching rehaul. Okay? Now, while Marty Taylor is still on the team, we will get to him specifically a bit later, he had his role changed. Okay? Mike Groh, former offensive coordinator, gone. Okay, you look at Mr. I won't name him. I won't name the wide receivers coach. I refuse. Okay, but Mr. Matt Hollins is. I'm gonna name him Carson Wentz. Focus. Okay, gone. Philip Daniels, who I don't really agree with that firing. That wasn't a move I would have made, but I do understand the need in the bigger picture to an extent. I get it. Okay, all of those positions where you have guys like Sharif Miller, where you have guys like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and of course Carson Wentz, you've had significant capital spent in those positions. You need the coaching to match. So the Eagles went out, they made a lot of coaching adjustments. Aaron Moorhead in at wide receivers. Absolutely love that. There are several others to note there. But I want to start at the very, very top. And that is that with this draft, I think there was something the Eagles fans wanted, and that's what the Eagles fans needed. And I think that goes for a lot of things in life. Okay? In an ideal world, we all want a relationship that is fun, that's spicy, that's exotic, that keeps you on your toes, that's a little bit hard to get. The chase never really stops. Probably a little bit toxic. Alright? What you need is something that's going to be a lot more stable, that's going to help you thrive and grow as a person, and support you in what you do in life. Whether that be a career, whether that be a business venture, whether that just be as a person who's gone through some stuff in the past. You can look at a car. What we all want is a super fast exotic Ferrari, you know, with a lovely V8. What we need might be something for a family of four that can take the kids to school every day. You can say that example for everything. What we want and what we need are two very, very different things. What we wanted, what all Eagles fans wanted with this Eagles draft was a number one weapon for Carson Wentz at wide receiver, They wanted a new starter at safety, a key starter at linebacker, probably a new defensive end, a new backup quarterback. There's a lot of needs there, obviously, but the main focus was a new weapon for Carson Wentz. You get him some help, get him some weaponry, blah, blah, blah. We want this. We need that element of speed on this offense now. What they got was, I feel, that weapon in Jalen Reagor and a bunch of question marks and a bunch of picks that made Eagles fans, for the most part, go why or what or how. Okay, Jalen Hurts at the time, no one really got. Davion Taylor, a very raw prospect, only 3 years of college experience, very rapid. Again, we'll touch on this. 4th round pick, Kayvon Wallace, steal. The further you get down, my guy John Hightower, adore him. But Casey Toohill, maybe a bit too late there for defensive end. The linebacker pick wasn't ideal in Bradley. Like, there are question marks. It's all about athleticism. All these question marks, okay? But again, what Eagles fans wanted was like certain starters. They wanted certainty at every starting spot. What they needed, in honesty, was an evolution. And we can talk about this, and I'm going to get this schedule up now, and I've spoken about this point before, and I think I need to make it before we actually go into the reason why. The Eagles' opponents in 2020, there's a very, very common theme, okay? Cardinals, Browns, Giants, arguably, you can include Saquon Barkley there, Rams, Seahawks, Ravens, Saints, Niners. That's not every team, that's just the ones I'm highlighting. What do they all have in common? All of them. Either A, a very complex offense that is based on misdirection, that is based on misconception, that is based on option reads. B, a mobile or dual threat quarterback. And C, gadget players. Be it Taysom Hill, be it Tommy Stevens, be it Deebo Samuel. Now the Eagles have tried and failed over the last 3 years to get this right. Okay? And there's an offensive and a defensive point to this. The offensive point of it is, well, they haven't had a deep threat. In 2016, Dorial Green-Beckham and Bryce Treggs and Shelton Gibson were the names. In 2017, I love him, Torrey Smith, it was inconsistent. In his own words, he had the worst stretch of his career with the Eagles before rebounding in that amazing championship game performance. Something that will go down in history, okay? You then go to 2018 and 19, Mike Wallace didn't do anything, got injured. Deshaun Jackson got injured. If you want to compete with speed offenses, you can't do it by going station to station, by going check down to check down. We're not in the Sam Bradford era anymore. You've got a quarterback in Carson Wentz, who we know is the ninth highest ranked quarterback in the league for passes above 20 yards. And he did that by throwing to guys like me. They needed weapons. So what the Eagles did, in an offseason where resources are limited, coronavirus obviously dominates the global headlines. It breaks every cycle of life that we come to know. And just on that note, I hope none of you have been too severely affected by it. And if anyone needs to talk or vent, again, DMs are always open on Twitter. There's no judgment, just a safe space for anyone that wants to get stuff off their chest. I know this is a very taxing time for a lot of us in many different aspects. But the Eagles then know, all right, well, we've got limited resources. We know our scouting team has struggled. We know our medical staff has struggled. We know the last draft wasn't great. And if we are brutally honest with ourselves, we haven't developed talent. Name me a wide receiver since 2016 the Eagles have developed. Name me one. Nelson Aguilar did not develop. He had a breakout flash year and disappeared. Tight end, that is an elite talent. You can't. That's unreal. That's, fair play to Justin Peele, but I feel like most tight end coaches in the league would get Zach Ertz to where he is. Do you know what I mean? Offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland will be the only exception. Only exception for the work he did with Vaitai, who got a $50 million deal, for the work he did with Sayamalo, who, let's bear in mind, moved to centre, snapped balls out of the stadium in pre-season, and moves to left guard. Outside of that, cornerback, no. Safety, veterans, no real development there. Any younger prospect that's come in hasn't done brilliantly. Linebacker, let's not talk about it. Defensive line, has Barnett become the starter we envisioned? I'm not answering that. I don't want to. That's not my debate for this podcast. Carson Wentz took his biggest step forward when he found quarterback coaching in the offseason. And his footwork went from sloppy as hell to borderline perfect. And yet still, I think quarterback coaches who are very hard to evaluate because we don't see that development as head on. And yet Wentz, who came out of college with fumbling and ball security concerns, still has fumbling and ball security concerns. And that's not a knock on him. I love Carson Wentz. I think he's a generationally talented quarterback who could go down as one of the greats in Eagles history. Doesn't stop him from being overly aggressive and trying to launch the ball out when he's going to the ground and potentially causing vital interceptions, bad turnovers, and losing his head in blowouts, like he did against the Saints in 2018. He's got better at that. He has improved at that bit. The maturity's there, but the ball security still isn't. And that gets to him. That's got to change. Press Taylor didn't do that. After what we saw with John DeFilippo, nothing. So the Eagles revamp their coaching staff, okay? And then they go, well, now we've got guys like Aaron Moorhead, who coached Christian Kirk at Texas A&M. Now we've got guys like Matt Burke, who has worked with me in Detroit, I beg your pardon, went on to coach at Miami, comes to the Eagles to reunite with Jim Schwartz. He's followed him everywhere. He's like his little parrot on the shoulder, okay? He knows exactly what Schwartz is after in a defensive line. A defensive line that is already supremely talented. He's now a DL coach. Wide receiver coach Moorhead. DB coach Mark Manuel, who helped guys like DeMonte Kazee break out in Atlanta. Who helped guys like Keanu Neal break out in Atlanta. And you see this new pattern of the Eagles going, well, if we're going to draft players, we need to develop them. We can't have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside learning the playbook X, Y, Z, Arabic, Spanish, German, reciting it backwards and in Morse code before playing a snap. That can't happen. That can't happen. So then they go, well, look, if we're going to draft players to develop, we need raw traits. And if we're going to get into shootouts with teams, let's be honest, okay, it's hard to stop the Ravens. It's hard to stop the Seahawks. And the Eagles give them a go. The Eagles are giving the Seahawks a go every year in the last few. Every time they've played, it has been nail-biting. There have been some of Carson Wentz's greatest moments against the Seahawks. There have been some really iconic, memorable moments and some heartbreaking ones. It's a tight game. The Saints have decimated the Eagles. Okay? The Niners. Alright, this is tough. The Rams, it's tough. You can't rely on, as much as the defense dragged the offense kicking and screaming last year, I feel like you still need a semi-competent offense to stay in shootouts. If the other team goes 7-3-3, 7-3, 0-0-0, 3-7, you've still got to go points the other way. And the Eagles could not start fast last year. They could barely finish fast last year. So they got speed. And they got raw speed. Speed is already there that you don't need to coach up in an off-season where you might not have OTAs, where you might not have training camp, where you might not have a season that is now going to be longer, that is now going to have more playoff teams as you envisioned. So you've got guys like Davion Taylor, who can go up, down, left, right very, very quickly. You've got guys like John Hightower, who is a beast, who's a bigger guy at 6'1", but he runs very quickly. Jalen Reagor's play speed is totally different to his 40 time. Kez Watkins, another speedster. Marquise Goodwin comes in to help at wide receiver. And then, the enigma of Jalen Hurts. Now, what is making these quarterback-heavy teams like, let's say, I don't want to say New Orleans, but Taysom Hill is a big X factor there. We know Lamar Jackson's rushing ability is, right? Let's just say we understand now the Eagles built their offense to move fast. That didn't need explaining. This bit did. Because without me explaining that, this next bit doesn't make sense. Okay? I wrote an article earlier today. I dove into why I thought the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts. And I'm going to try and take chunks of this article, so forgive me if you're reading or watching this, for me looking at the screen. I'm trying to, take bits of information here. Jalen Hurts is 6'2", 218 pounds. Completed nearly 70% of his passes last year. 32 to 8 TD to INT ratio. And rushed for nearly 1,300 yards. Missed the Heisman because of Joe Burrow. Me, right? That's fair enough. Why do the Eagles need that? You can look at... I have my heart set on James Morgan. I know the Eagles really like James Morgan. This was kept quiet. Of all the formal meetings that were announced, Jalen Hurts never got out there. It was never announced that Jalen Hurts was a formal meeting at the Combine. That was never a thing. Why would they? Okay, this was kept under the radar. Now, Jalen Hurts said that in his first presser as an Eagle. What sparked that was why. Why would they go and meet with him at the Combine? I want you to think about the offensive coordinator by committee role the Eagles are taking. Okay, I'm going to run through the names and why here. Rich Scangarello obviously came out of Denver, coached the second half of the season with Drew Lock, where, again, we spoke about this before. A lot of play action looks, a lot of trying to get the quarterback into open space and to rely on some of the then deep threat that they had, and obviously utilising the running back of Philip Lindsay, who didn't take too well to some of his coaching. But overall, you could see it. More importantly, the year before that, Scangarello worked with Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco. Now, that is an offense that does a lot of things differently. It's unconventional. It's Shanahan. It's a lot of sweeps and screens. And you can go back a couple years for the Eagles here. They got the yak leader. They got Golden Tate at a trade deadline, and they couldn't implement him. They tried it with Nelson Aguilar. Couldn't implement him. They got Alshon Jeffrey catching screen passes. Couldn't implement him. This is someone that understands how to get playmakers in a position, and how, if they can't, how to get the quarterback in a position to extend plays so the playmakers move on. Okay? Nice. Andrew Bruner is the name that is very, very overlooked here. And this I found stunning. Okay? This was mad. Andrew Bruner, you can see I'm trying to read it at the same time. Words at Mississippi State. Okay? He worked with Tommy Stevens. Now, Tommy Stevens, for those who don't know, Penn State, drafted very, very late by New Orleans to snatch him away from Carolina. Why? He's basically Taysom Hill II. Basically Taysom Hill II. 11 touchdowns, 5 picks. He's 6'5". It's not great, like most Penn State quarterbacks, don't say it. But he also added 4 touchdowns on the ground, 381 rushing yards. Keep it in mind. Because then, in his first season at MSU, he helped Nick Fitzgerald lead the FBS in 100-plus rushing yard games by a quarterback. Think about it. You've now got someone that can get quarterbacks open, someone that is specialising in dual-threat quarterbacks. Third guy, Press Taylor, said this at a press conference in June last year. I think at some point one of the big things will be having multiple people on the field who can throw the ball. That's something going forward. You've seen the Philly special. You've seen all different versions of double passes. I think at some point, I can see something like that coming into play. I'm not necessarily saying the Eagles will be doing anything like that. I just think it's pushing the envelope. Think about it. Taylor was the one that brought the Philly special to Peterson's eye. Of course, it had been run before. Of course, the Patriots ran it against them before. But Taylor was the one that pushed for it. And then the final piece of the puzzle, Marty Morninweg, who I hope I'm saying that right. I can never get it right. We know he worked with the Eagles for basically 10 years, 2003 to 2012. Worked with Peterson for a few years. The big thing here, 2 things. In his time as an NFL head coach, or an NFL coach, he's finished with a top 10 scoring offense 9 times, a top 10 passing offense 9 times, and a top 10 rushing offense 9 times. In 18 years, as an OC or HC, he achieved a top 15 offense 12 times. He knows what he's doing. Then, in 2018, he was the man that helped facilitate the injection of Lamar Jackson instead of Joe Flacco. And in the last 7 games of the season, Jackson had 79.4 rushing yards per game with 4 touchdowns. That's impressive. He also helped Michael Vick return to football and become an absolute weapon. His return to football, controversial, we all know the story behind it, became a miracle run because of Marty, essentially, facilitated it. Now, again, I don't think Jalen Hurts was drafted by the Eagles to flip. I don't think Jalen Hurts was drafted by the Eagles to be a backup to Wentz. As much as he is, and an insurance policy, if Wentz goes down, hey, you've got Jalen Hurts there. He's not there to be a gadget player like Taysom Hill. I think, and I may be wrong, but you don't draft a quarterback with 1,300 yards rushing in a season from a school that prestigious, working with CD Lamb, completing nearly 70% of his passes without an ulterior motive. Not with that many wide receivers. Guys like John Hightower. Guys like Kez Watkins. You then trade for Marquise Goodwin. You've got Deshaun Jackson. You add Jalen Reagor. That's 5. That's not even touching Alshon. That's not even touching Greg Ward. It's not even touching J-Jaw. The Eagles have more speed than they know what to do with. The missing part of that, the X factor of that, is Jalen Hurts. It is. He lined up at wide receiver at Alabama at times for Tua. The triple option looks that we saw run last year by Oklahoma broke defenses. Because you're so concerned with Lamb and these other guys. A triple handoff and Hurts is going to run right around the outside. And I'm not being funny, a guy that size can line up at wide receiver and hold his own. He can line up at running back and hold his own. The Eagles didn't draft a running back. The Eagles didn't draft a tight end. The Eagles didn't take a fullback. Jalen Hurts and his ability to pass that accurately, on the move, to be able to extend plays, to get into open space, is no coincidence that it comes in a year when the Eagles have got a schedule stacked against teams that do exactly the same, in a league that is evolving like the 3-point bubble in the NBA. The second the Warriors started doing it, the rest of the league plays catch up. Here we go. We've got to do something. We've got to keep it rolling here. Baltimore 2018, prime example. Prime example. And look at what we're seeing now. It's no coincidence that you go, we can't develop players. Let's revamp our coaching staff, who all bring this bizarre background of dual threat quarterbacks, or quarterbacks outside the pocket, or quarterbacks with help from rapid receivers, and let's bundle them together. This isn't a coincidence. This is Howie Roseman playing 4D chess when the rest of the league is playing checkers. And I don't want to sit here and say, yeah, Jalen Hurts was a fantastic pick. I buy everything that Howie's saying. I think he was abrupt with the media. He was defensive with the media. He seemed confused and irked. But if there is a unanimous team decision to get behind Jalen Hurts and make him this focal point of the offense, be it as a second passer, be it as a receiver, whatever, with that coaching staff and those weapons, you're telling me Carson Wentz can't rotate out from Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, and let's say John Hightower, and Jalen Hurts comes in with Kez Watkins, Greg Ward Jr., Marquise Goodwin on one play, just to see how the defense adapts to that. It's spicy. And another thing, and I want to give credit here to Fourth and John. They mentioned it on Twitter. I think they held a live Twitter podcast with Jimmy from On the Road to Victory. And he said that essentially Jalen Hurts can play the role of a spy quarterback now. Can play a Russell Wilson in practice. Can play a Taysom Hill in practice. Can play a Lamar Jackson in practice. Scout team helps win games. That's a big bonus. I don't think the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts to flip him. I don't think they did. As much as you can speculate, I don't think they did. Howie's not that stupid. This is the same guy that didn't tag and trade Nick Foles because it made no sense. You don't draft a quarterback in the second round expecting not to get second round value back unless there is either A, something very clinically wrong with Carson Wentz we're not aware of, or B, you've got a very key role for him. And I think it's the latter, because we've had no information about the former. So I looking at it, I think Jalen Hurts is the X Factor pick. And everyone's seeing him as this outside guy. He's the guy the draft is centered around. The team, in a way, being built around the abilities of Jalen Hurts. And this is speculation. We may not see it ever. We may not see it until week 1, week 2, week 3, however that goes. But there is a very good chance this draft class will center around Hurts. The offense will be built around Hurts. And Wentz can sit back here without taking as much pressure, without taking as many quarterback hits, can get outside the pocket, have fun, and sling it deep and get away with it. I genuinely believe that. So, for anyone still questioning Jalen Hurts, he's landed in a team where you have got 4 men on an offensive coordinator staff who have groomed quarterbacks exactly like him. Exactly like him. I think that's exciting. And I do think that's exciting. And I wanted to bring that spin because there's been a lot of negativity. And I feel bad for Hurts for coming into a media landscape of people bashing him on sports talk radio, people giving him jip, whatever. It's not right. I think that was the pick. I think that makes sense to me. And I'd love to know what you guys think. So again, if you're on YouTube right now, the podcast is going to cut. And we're going to do Thank You Next, which is a segment where I answer your questions that you sent to me on Twitter, which is @LiamJenkinsPSN. If you're listening by audio, hello. We're going to get into these very soon. But if you want to subscribe to the podcast, guys, there are links down in the description. The full show is on Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. Basically everywhere you could ever imagine. So if you want to subscribe, that would be amazing. Thank you for taking time to watch the video. Let's get to your questions.